Cozy Tales Collective, where dreams begin and worries fade. Welcome back. As the night sky wraps around the world, it's time for you to embrace stillness. Take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, let your thoughts settle like stars shining in the vast sky. Your body softens, your mind quiets, and all that remains is a feeling of peaceful surrender to the night. Let's journey together into a story that will lull you into a deep and restful sleep. Red Horizon. Chapter 1. I always thought being stationed on Mars would be boring. Endless red dust, long shifts monitoring comms, and the occasional supply drop from Earth. That was my routine, until the day we picked up the signal. It came through our long-range array at precisely 0200 hours, a garbled distress call warped by time and distance. The call sign matched a ship that had vanished 30 years ago, the Celeste. No wreckage had ever been found, no survivors, no explanation. Just a ghost ship, lost to the void. I turned to my partner, Lieutenant Vega, who was already pale under the dim console lights. "You seeing this?" I asked. She nodded, her fingers tapping rapidly on the console. "This can't be right. The Celeste was declared lost in 2097. Well, someone or something is still transmitting from it," I muttered. Captain Doran arrived minutes later, summoned by the emergency alert. His face was unreadable as he studied the screen. "Where's the signal coming from?" Vega recalibrated the coordinates, then stiffened. "Sir, it's here." A heavy silence filled the room. "That's impossible," Doran said. But the coordinates didn't lie. The Celeste was somewhere on Mars, broadcasting from the northern ridge of Valles Marineris, and we were going to find it. The descent 3 hours later, our team was suited up and packed into the Atlas, our exploration rover. There were 6 of us, me, Vega, Captain Doran, Sergeant Lynn, Private O'Malley, and our engineer Patel. The Martian landscape stretched endlessly before us as we drove into the canyon. Shadows loomed from jagged rock formations, and the thin atmosphere played tricks on the eyes, distorting the horizon. "We should have found wreckage long before now," Lynn said. "Unless someone didn't want it found," Vega murmured. I tightened my grip on my rifle. The idea of a 30-year-old ghost ship sitting in a canyon on Mars didn't make sense. Someone had to have covered it up. But why? As we rounded the next ridge, the Atlas's headlights illuminated something in the distance. A ship. Not just any ship, the Celeste. It was half buried in the dust, its hull pitted and scorched. The distress beacon blinked weakly from the side, barely holding power. "That's it," Patel whispered. We parked the Atlas and disembarked, our boots crunching against the frozen dust. I felt a weight pressing on my chest, not just from Mars's thin atmosphere, but something deeper, something instinctual. Something was wrong. "Stay together," Doran ordered. "Helmets on, weapons ready." We advanced cautiously. The airlock was partially open, The metal warped and rusted as if something had forced it apart. O'Malley hesitated. This doesn't look like normal damage. Vega ran a scanner over the breach. No external impacts. It was opened from the inside. A chill ran through me. Doran took point. Move in. We stepped inside. The dead ship. The interior was a crypt. Our helmet lights cast long shadows over the darkened corridors. The walls were covered in deep gouges, as if someone had clawed at them in desperation. Equipment lay strewn across the floor, untouched for decades. Lynn moved cautiously to a control panel. Patel, see if you can get power running. Patel knelt beside the main terminal and began rewiring the system. Within moments, emergency lights flickered on, bathing everything in a sickly red glow. That's when the whispers started. I turned sharply, heart pounding. The comms crackled with faint voices, garbled and distant. Help us! They're still here! Don't let them out. Comms interference? I asked, trying to sound rational. Vega shook her head. I don't think so. I scanned the corridor ahead. The ship was silent, but I felt something watching us. Then O'Malley screamed. I spun around. He was gone. His rifle lay abandoned on the ground, dust swirling where he had just stood. Where the hell did he go? Vega shouted. Doran cursed. Fan out, find him. We searched the corridor, calling his name. But there was nothing. No trace of him, no signs of struggle. He had just vanished. And then the lights went out. The forgotten horror. We switched to helmet lamps, our breathing loud in the silence. Then Lynn gasped. Over here! She was standing in front of a shattered cryopod. The glass was fractured outward, as if something had broken free from the inside. The nameplate read, Dr. Elias Kale, lead researcher. Patel checked the ship's logs, his hands shaking. Captain, the Celeste wasn't just a transport ship. It was a classified research vessel. What kind of research? Doran demanded. Patel paled. Human experiments. A sinking feeling settled in my gut. Vega read the last entry aloud. We were wrong. The signal wasn't a message. It was a trap. We brought it aboard, thinking it was artificial. But it was alive. It got into our systems, into our minds. We thought cryo would contain it. We were wrong. A distant clicking echoed through the ship. I raised my rifle. What was that? The clicking grew louder, closer. A skittering sound like insect legs scraping metal. Then we saw it. A tall, emaciated figure stood at the end of the corridor. Its skin was stretched tight over its bones, its eyes black voids that reflected nothing. It twitched unnaturally, its elongated fingers curling as if testing the air. Kale. He or it had been in cryo for 30 years, and now it was awake. Lynn screamed as Kale lunged. Doran fired first, his shot searing through the creature's shoulder. It barely reacted. Instead, it moved through the walls, shifting like smoke, its form unstable, as if reality itself couldn't hold it in place. We ran. Lynn wasn't fast enough. Kale grabbed her, his fingers sinking into her suit as if she were made of mist. She convulsed, her body disintegrating into dust before our eyes. We sprinted toward the exit. Kale's whispers filled the ship. You opened the door. Now we can leave. We barely made it outside. Patel tripped, and I hauled him to his feet as the Celeste shook, a deep, inhuman roar echoing from within. The ground beneath the ship fractured. Something else was inside. Something worse. "Go! Now!" Doran shouted. We scrambled into the Atlas, and Vega floored it. Behind us, the Celeste collapsed, its hull warping inward, as if the ship itself was being devoured. The canyon trembled. A black mist seeped from the wreckage, reaching toward the sky. I could still hear the whispers. "We are free. We are coming." Then silence. Aftermath. We made it back to base, shaken but alive. Doran immediately called for a quarantine of the site, but we all knew it wouldn't matter. Something left that ship, and we had no idea where it went. Later that night, as I sat alone in my bunk, my calm crackled. A voice whispered through the static, "Thank you." I didn't sleep after that. None of us did. Chapter 2. The signal persists. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. After the incident at the Celeste, Captain Doran ordered us to seal the base. All outgoing communications were heavily monitored, and we were put on a mandatory psychological evaluation schedule. But there was no amount of regulation or routine that could make what we had seen, what we had unleashed, feel normal. The worst part? The signal never stopped. Even though the Celeste had been swallowed by the Martian dust, its transmission persisted. The long-range comms still picked up that same eerie, distorted voice, the same garbled distress call. "Help us. They're still here." I sat at my station, staring at the readouts. Vega was beside me, her fingers twitching on the console. It had been almost 24 hours since we escaped the canyon, but that damn signal wouldn't die. "This doesn't make sense," Vega muttered. "The ship is gone. We saw it collapse. The signal should have disappeared with it." "But it didn't," I said grimly. "Which means—" Vega turned to me, her face pale. "Which means it wasn't coming from the ship." A shiver ran down my spine. If the Celeste was never the source, then we had only just scratched the surface of something much bigger, something much worse. The vanishing. By the next morning, Patel was gone. His bunk was untouched. His boots were still at the foot of his bed. No signs of forced entry, no alarms triggered. Just like O'Malley, he had vanished without a trace. Doran assembled what was left of the team in the mess hall. His jaw was clenched tight, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "This stops now," he said. "We are locking down this base until we figure out what the hell is happening." Lynn had been Patel's closest friend. She slammed a fist against the table. "What is there to figure out? That thing, Kale, took them." "We don't know that," Doran countered. "We don't know anything yet." Vega looked up from her data pad, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. I ran Patel's biometric logs. His heart rate spiked around 0300 hours, then nothing, like he just ceased to exist. A heavy silence settled over us. Doran exhaled sharply. "Double security shifts. Nobody is alone. We keep our helmets and weapons on at all times. Understood?" We all nodded, but deep down I already knew the truth. Security measures wouldn't save us, because it was already inside. Echoes in the dark. That night, I sat in the security room with Vega, scanning the base's surveillance feeds. The halls were empty. The base was silent. And then, at exactly 0300 hours, a new signal appeared. My heart pounded. That's not the Celeste's distress call. Vega's fingers trembled over the console. No, this is something else. We listened. At first it was just static, then a faint whisper, a voice I recognized. Patel. My blood ran cold. Vega's eyes widened. It's him. Patel's voice, distorted and faint, was whispering through the static. But that was impossible. I swallowed hard. Trace the signal. She nodded, running the calculations. Seconds stretched into eternity as the system locked onto the source. Then she froze. The signal. It's coming from inside the base. My stomach dropped. A sudden bang echoed from the hallway outside. We both jumped. Another bang, then another. It was coming from the airlock. Something was knocking. Slow, deliberate. Vega grabbed my arm. That can't be Patel. That's not... The base lights flickered. Then the knocking stopped. I pulled my rifle off my back and motioned for Vega to follow. We crept toward the main entrance, our boots silent on the metal floor. The airlock controls blinked, indicating an external pressure change, as if something had just entered the base. Vega, I whispered, seal the doors. She nodded, reaching for the controls, and then the emergency lights went red. The base's AI spoke, its voice cold and detached. Warning, internal breach detected. The monitors flickered, and then, for a fraction of a second, I saw something on the feed. A tall, emaciated figure standing at the far end of the corridor. Its skin stretched tight over bones that barely looked human. Its eyes, black, empty voids, stared directly into the camera. Then the screen glitched, and it was gone. Hunted the base was in chaos. Lynn and Doran had already mobilized, weapons drawn. We met in the central hub, scanning every shadow, every corner. Status, Doran barked. Something got inside, I said. We saw it on the feeds. Lynn cursed under her breath. How? The airlock was sealed. It doesn't need doors, Vega whispered. Doran frowned. What the hell does that mean? Before I could answer, the lights cut out completely, pitch black. Then footsteps, slow, deliberate clicking sounds on the metal floor. Something was moving. Vega grabbed my wrist. Do you hear that? I did. Whispers, hundreds of them, overlapping, merging, echoing through the halls. Open the door. Set us free. Let us in. My breath hitched. The whispers were coming from every direction. Lynn's breathing grew erratic. It's in my head. Oh, God, it's in my... The screams came next. Doran fired blindly into the darkness. The muzzle flash illuminated the corridor for just a second. And in that second, I saw it. Kale's twisted form, flickering between dimensions, shifting like a mirage. His fingers dug into Lynn's skull, her body convulsing. Then she was gone. Not dead. Not bleeding. Just erased, like she had never existed at all. Vega grabbed my arm. We need to go, now! Doran backed toward the command center. Fall back! We ran, but the whispers followed. The thing moved through the base like a shadow, sliding through walls, bending physics like it was nothing. And then the alarms blared. The base AI's voice crackled through the speakers. Catastrophic failure detected. Core meltdown in T-minus 10 minutes. I turned to Doran. What the hell is happening? He gritted his teeth. I triggered the fail-safe. Vega's eyes widened. You're going to blow the base? If this thing gets off-world, we're all screwed, Doran snapped. We have to contain it. The walls groaned as something slammed into them. The whispers screamed in unison, the pressure in the room crushing us. I grabbed Vega's arm. Escape pods! Now! We sprinted down the corridor, the ship-like screeches of the creature reverberating behind us. Doran stayed behind, rifle raised. Go! He shouted. I hesitated, but he shoved me forward. That's an order. I had no choice. Vega and I reached the escape bay, launching ourselves into the pods just as the base shook violently. Through the small window, I saw Doran, standing in the command center as the shadows closed in around him. Then, the explosion. A blinding shock wave ripped through the base as my pod detached, sending us hurtling into the Martian sky. The last thing I saw before we left the atmosphere was the black mist, writhing out of the wreckage. Doran's sacrifice had failed. The thing wasn't destroyed, it was free. Chapter 3: The Ones Who Hear. The escape pod shook violently as it breached the thin Martian atmosphere. My fingers clenched the harness straps so tight I thought they might snap. Vega sat across from me, her face pale in the dim emergency lighting. We had escaped. But we hadn't won. Through the small viewport I saw the base below, a smoking crater in the red dust, the wreckage still glowing from the explosion. The thing we had unleashed, the thing that had taken Patel, O'Malley, Lynn, and Doran, was still there. And worse, it was no longer trapped. Vega's voice was barely above a whisper. It's not over. I turned to her. I know. The pod's navigation AI crackled to life. Autopilot engaged. Calculating course to Phobos station. Phobos? The orbital outpost where our relief crew was stationed. The last human presence before deep space. We were heading straight for it, and we were bringing something with us. No escape. The flight to Phobos took 6 hours. 6 long, silent hours where neither of us spoke. The whispering had started somewhere around hour 3, faint at first. Let us in. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the sides of my helmet. Vega's breathing grew ragged. I knew she was hearing it too. You opened the door. I couldn't listen. Not again. Not after what happened to the others. I focused on the cold, sterile walls of the pod, repeating the same thought over and over in my head. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. Then the AI's voice cut through the static. Incoming transmission from Phobos station. Vega shot me a glance. We hadn't called them. Patch it through, I said. The comm crackled, then a voice came through. It was Captain Rourke, head of Phobos station. This is Phobos Command to Atlas survivors. We've been tracking your escape pod. What the hell happened down there? I swallowed. How could we possibly explain it? Vega leaned forward, her voice tight. Sir, we need immediate quarantine upon arrival. The base is gone. Doran initiated a self-destruct. A pause. Then, explain. I hesitated. We found the Celeste. It was a trap, sir. Something was inside. And now it's free. Static. Then Rourke's voice came back, lower, wary. You're telling me there's an active threat on Mars? Vega's expression darkened. No, sir. She turned to me. It's not just on Mars. A long silence. Then Rourke said something that made my blood run cold. If that's true, then why are we already hearing the signal up here? Phobos Station. The docking process was routine. The panic in my chest was not. Phobos Station was a small, self-contained research hub orbiting Mars, staffed by 12 people. As we disembarked, I immediately noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. Rourke met us at the airlock, flanked by 2 security officers. His gaze flicked between us, sharp and assessing. You two look like hell. We've been through worse, Vega muttered. Rourke nodded, then gestured for us to follow. You said this thing got out. Explain. As we walked, Vega and I recounted everything. The Celeste, Kale, the disappearances, the thing inside the base. Rourke's face remained unreadable, but his hands were clenched behind his back. Finally, he stopped outside the comms room and gestured toward the terminal. The signal's been broadcasting for hours, he said. And it's changing. I stiffened. Changing how? He flicked a switch, and the room filled with a deep, inhuman whispering, the same whispers we had heard on Mars, but this time I recognized words. We are here. You brought us home. I took a step back. No, that's not possible. Vega's voice was a whisper. We didn't just release it, we spread it. Rourke exhaled sharply. That's what I was afraid of. I turned to him. You knew? His jaw tightened. We suspected something was wrong before you even launched your mission. Vega's hands clenched into fists. And you sent us anyway? Rourke didn't answer, because he didn't have to. The infected. The station wasn't right. I could feel it the moment we stepped inside. The hallways were too empty. The overhead lights flickered. The security team we passed wouldn't look us in the eye. Then I noticed something else. Whispering. Not over the comms. From the people themselves. Vega must have seen it too because she grabbed my arm, her voice sharp. They're infected. The words sent a shockwave through my brain. How? Then I realized, the signal. It wasn't just a distress call, it was a carrier. A virus, a mind plague. And we had brought it to Phobos. The ones who hear we had to get out. Now. I turned to Rourke, but his expression had gone rigid. His pupils were slightly dilated. His fingers twitched at his sides. I knew that look. I had seen it before. Kale. I took a slow step back. Vega's breathing was sharp and fast. Rourke. He smiled. We hear them now, he whispered. My blood turned to ice. The whispering in the station grew louder. The crew were all infected, and we were trapped with them. Escape or die, Rourke lunged. I barely had time to react before Vega yanked me backward, drawing her sidearm. She fired once, right into his shoulder. He didn't bleed, didn't even flinch. He twitched, his body distorting, flickering between forms just like Kale had. The whispering rose to a scream. The station crew were moving now, their voices overlapping, their bodies twitching as they advanced. They weren't human anymore. "Run!" Vega shouted. We bolted down the corridor, gunfire ringing behind us as we tore through the station. "Warning," the AI droned. "Quarantine protocol engaged. All exits locked." No, we weren't going to die here. We skidded into the docking bay. An escape shuttle was still prepped on the launch deck. "Cover me!" Vega shouted, sprinting for the controls. I turned, rifle raised, as the infected crew rounded the corner. Their bodies twisted, elongated, their eyes nothing but black voids. I fired. One of them collapsed, but the others kept coming. Vega worked frantically, her fingers flying across the controls. "Launch override engaged. 30 seconds to departure." "Vega, move!" I grabbed her as the shuttle ramp lowered. We stumbled inside, slamming the hatch behind us, just as the first infected crew reached the ship. The last thing I saw before the doors closed was Rourke's twisted smile. "There is nowhere to run," he whispered. Then the thrusters ignited and we were launched into the void. Nowhere is safe. We left Phobos behind, but the whispering followed. Vega sat across from me, her eyes hollow. The distress signal was still playing over the ship's comms, even though I had shut it off. We had escaped, but it was too late. The signal wasn't on Mars anymore. It wasn't just in Phobos. It was out there now, traveling across the entire system, and soon it would reach Earth. Chapter 4. The Signal Reaches Earth. The whispering wouldn't stop, no matter what we did. No matter how many times I disabled the comms, purged the systems, or tried to drown it out, the signal persisted. It was everywhere. It slithered through the ship's speakers, lurked in the white noise of the ventilation system, pulsed in the low hum of the engines. And the worst part? It was inside our heads now. Vega sat across from me, hunched over in her seat, eyes hollow. She hadn't spoken since we left Phobos Station. She just sat there listening to them. I clenched my fists. I couldn't let this happen. Not to her, not to me, not to Earth, because that's where we were headed, straight home, and we were bringing the infection with us. Too late to stop it. We had been in transit for nearly 16 hours. Our shuttle wasn't meant for long-range travel, but Earth Command had already picked us up on their scanners. They were expecting us. They didn't know. Didn't know that Phobos was lost. Didn't know that the signal had spread. Didn't know that by the time we landed, it would already be too late. I tried to warn them. I really did. "This is Lieutenant Callum Hayes requesting immediate quarantine upon arrival. I repeat, do not let us disembark. We have been compromised." The transmission cut off, static, then the AI's voice eerily calm. Message delivery failed. I stared at the console, my pulse hammering. That's not possible. Vega finally looked up. Her voice was distant, detached. They don't want the message to go through. I swallowed hard. They? She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she whispered, "The ones who hear. The ones who hear." I gripped the flight controls tighter. Vega, don't do this. She smiled faintly, like it wasn't her anymore, like something else was wearing her face. They're already there, Callum, she said softly. They've been there. I shook my head. No, that's not possible. The signal, it's been broadcasting for decades, she interrupted. Long before we heard it. Long before the Celeste even found it. Don't you see? The infection was never contained. It was just waiting. The air in the cabin felt suddenly thick. The whispering grew louder, surrounding me. I fought against it, gripping the edge of the console so hard my fingers ached. You're wrong, I growled. We can still stop this. Vega just laughed. A slow, empty sound. How do you stop something that's already won? Earth approaches. The automated guidance system engaged. The screen in front of me displayed Earth, growing larger by the second. Home, but not safe. I had to make a decision. I could already see the docking sequence initiating. The moment we landed, the infection would spread. We would spread it. Vega was lost. And if I didn't act now, so was humanity. I reached for the manual override. I could disable the guidance, change our course, send us anywhere but Earth. But as soon as my fingers touched the controls, Vega moved. Fast. Her hands clamped around my wrist, unnaturally strong. You can't fight it, she whispered. I struggled, trying to pry her fingers away, but she was impossibly strong. Her pupils were fully dilated now, her veins dark against her pale skin. I realized, with a surge of horror, that I wasn't fighting Vega anymore. I was fighting them, and they weren't going to let me stop this. No other way. The ship was 30 minutes from landing. I had one shot, one way to end this. I looked at Vega, at whatever was left of her, and felt my chest tighten. I was about to lose my best friend, but I had already lost everything else. I reached for my sidearm. She saw it coming. She moved fast, lunging at me, but I was ready this time. The gun roared and she staggered back. A perfect shot, right through her heart. She collapsed against the console, gasping, her expression flickering between pain and something else. For a moment, just a moment, her eyes cleared. She was Vega again. Callum, she choked out. Tears burned in my eyes. I'm sorry. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. Good, she whispered. Then she stopped breathing. The whispering around me screamed in fury. But I didn't stop. I overrode the docking sequence, rerouting all remaining power to manual control. I veered off course, sending the shuttle away from Earth, away from the orbital path, straight into deep space. The final broadcast alarms blared. The ship wasn't designed for this. Fuel was burning fast, oxygen levels dropping, but I didn't care, because I had done it. I had stopped the infection from reaching Earth. I had sealed it away. The whispering had dimmed, but I could still feel them. Watching. Waiting. They weren't gone. Not yet. My hands trembled as I activated the comm system one last time. A final message. A warning. This is Lieutenant Callum Hayes. If anyone hears this, do not respond. Do not follow my signal. The infection is contained, but it is not dead. It cannot be killed. Do not come looking for me. and for the love of God, do not listen to the signal. I took a breath, my body heavy, my vision blurring. The stars stretched out before me, endless, silent. I had done my part, now I would drift, alone, with the whispering and the ones who hear.